President Cyril Ramaphosa's announcement announcing some restrictions here in South Africa. We've been talking to the Black Business Council. Now let's speak from the economic front. We're joined by Economist Dawie Roodt. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us, Dawie. So we've heard from the Black Business Council saying that this is encouraging, but there is the reality of global uncertainties and uneven domestic recovery that we have to contend with when we listen to this news.
Yes, good evening to you. Well, I think we should all welcome every kind of further relaxation to the lockdown regulations. We also have to admit that there's really very little that's standing in the way between a complete abolishment of the lockdown and what we currently have in place. And if anything, I would have liked to see the president abolishing all these sort of regulations that are still in place. The kind of things that are still left are so little that it's really not going to make much of an impact on economic activities. We can just as well get rid of it. And the kind of relaxation that the president has announced is not going to make much of an impact because there are far more important issues that is affecting the South African economy at the moment. So yes, always welcome to see the economy getting less of a lockdown, but it's hardly going to make any dent in the current environment in which we find ourselves.
Let's talk about some of those significant risks. The global developing energy crisis is something that's certainly weighing on us if we're going to talk about recovery, and if some of that is going to come from consumer spending. We are in a bit of a bind like the rest of the world.
Well, yes, certainly, and perhaps a little bit more than the rest of the world. The South African economy the Minister of Finance expected economic growth of just more than 2% this year. And that was on the 23rd of March when he delivered his budget speech. And I looked at these numbers and I looked at these estimates, and I was pretty much in line. Well, I agree with these estimates, although I think it was sailing quite close to the wind. And if something goes wrong, then those estimates will not be achieved. And the very next day, things started going wrong because the very next day, Russia invaded the Ukraine. So the result of that was a huge increase in oil prices. We saw the currency coming under some pressure, food prices going up and all that. And I'm afraid we're not going to see that 2% growth this year. The Reserve Bank is meeting later this week. Inflationary pressures are building up in South Africa, worldwide as well. And worldwide, central banks are tightening monetary policy. And I expect the Reserve Bank to tighten monetary policy as well, maybe even as much as 50 basis points. And that means that the South African economy will come under even more pressure. And of course, with that, you will see a further increase in unemployment and poverty and all of that. So I'm afraid we have been in quite a difficult situation as things were because of factors like the lockdown and many other things. And then on top of all of that, we've got this crisis coming from Central Europe. And I'm afraid we are not heading for a very nice place at the moment. So under these sort of circumstances, I would have liked to see the president getting rid of all kind of restrictions. And not only that, but to implement some significant structural adjustments to the South African economy, which is unlikely to happen because of politics mostly. But yes, you're absolutely right. We certainly do find ourselves in a bit of a bind.
And in terms of those structural restraints, which the finance minister also spoke about when looking at the medium to long-term outlook on COVID-19 or post-COVID-19 recovery. Part of it has been the weak financial position of several state-owned companies that rely on government support to operate. Let's talk about that and the spending programs that government was hoping to introduce, but that too being on the realization of contingent liabilities, the sustainability of public finances, as we mentioned.
Yeah, perhaps before I answer on that question, maybe I can just sort of point out to a bit of a silver lining. Because of what we're currently experiencing, because of the uncertainty coming from Europe, and the rise in commodity prices, there certainly is a silver lining for South Africa, and that is that commodity prices are going up. We're running a very nice and handsome current account surplus at the moment that is supporting the exchange rate of the currency, and that is also resulting in quite nice inflows for the Minister of Finance in the form of tax receipts. But you're absolutely right, that is not nearly enough to fix the rest of the financial problems that we're currently experiencing. The state-owned enterprises, especially Eskom, has been run into the ground financially and operationally, and the state's own finances are in real deep trouble. In the meantime, we had an increase of more than 10 million people receiving grants in South Africa, and the president also mentioned in his speech this evening that we've lost 2 million jobs because of the lockdown. And if you look at those kind of ratios, we have for every one person with a job in South Africa, we've got more than 2 people receiving an income from the state every month. Now, those sort of things are just not sustainable. The tax burden on the tax base in South Africa has become excessive, and we simply have to cut back on state spending, and we have to close down those state-owned enterprises that are just not profitable or mismanaged, because we just cannot afford that anymore. So under circumstances of difficulty, one would like to fall back on the state and get the state to support the economy. Unfortunately, the finances that the state is in such a state, forgive the pun, that they simply cannot afford to support the economy anymore because of mismanagement, mostly for the last couple of years.
Dawie, thank you so much for speaking to us and sharing your thoughts on the economy and how it will be impacted, if at all, on the latest announcement made by President Cyril Ramaphosa.